So when you slowly slip out of their control, you become an object of contempt. You stop being supply. You're a headache. And they want to put you back in your subjugated place. They want you in the service of their ego, not growing as an individual yourself. Now you know the drill. In any narcissistic relationship over time, you find yourself narrowing and narrowing and narrowing your behavior, your words, yourself. Day after day, year after year, you recognize that in this relationship you can't ever give the other person feedback. You can't even offer a small critique that's useful to them. You can't make your needs known. You can't share anything about yourself. You find that over time you can't talk about anything. Why? Because you're afraid of their rage. You're afraid of them blowing up at you. You're afraid of their manipulation, their gaslighting, their confusing word salad. You try to communicate, and that makes it worse. You follow all of the traditional guidance out there on healthy relationships. Well, obviously none of that works either. So then one day you realize it's easier to kind of keep your mouth shut, to go along to get along, because otherwise you're just going to get into a fight, and slowly you become half of yourself. You find that you slowly start to lose your authentic self in this relationship. Now, what I'm about to say is a review for many of you who watch this channel regularly, but the big question is, why do narcissistic people do this? Why do they become so enraged and confusing and dysregulated when they are hearing things that they don't want to hear and people are asking them things they don't want to do? Because everything activates their feelings of inadequacy, their insecurity, and their fear. In the midst of their bluster and rage, we forget that narcissistic people are merely really scared people who lash out at the sources of their shame. And you, because you're someone who's close to them, are a source of shame for them. It has nothing to do with you. You yourself aren't shameful. But something about you brings out their sense of inadequacy. Who knows? Maybe you have friends that have your back in a way that they don't have friends. Maybe you do better at work or at school. Maybe being cheerful and laughing out loud comes easy to you. Maybe you don't sweat the small stuff in life. Maybe because you sometimes tell them things they don't want to hear. Maybe because your kids like playing with you more than they like playing with them. Maybe because you married someone nicer than they did. Whatever it is, whoever this relationship is, the list is infinite. It's often the best parts of yourself that activate their shame. But most people don't understand this. So what do? They keep trying to do things to make it better, to avoid the narcissistic person's rage and cruelty and manipulation, and maybe even undervalue yourself. You'll start to feel guilty about succeeding. Maybe you try to convince your friends to like the narcissistic person in your life because you kind of pity them and you want people to like them. Or you downplay your own achievements so the narcissist doesn't feel bad. Or you passively just let go. And you see, maybe things will get better with the narcissistic person. And they don't. For the narcissistic person, all of that, their difficult patterns, right? Their entitlement, their arrogance, their chronic validation seeking, their need for control, their gaslighting, their lying, their superficiality, their passive aggression, all of this stuff, these are their defenses. Their defenses are like soldiers that protect their inadequacy and their insecurity. But when for any reason you're able to push through those defenses, and you may not mean to, but you do, and you ping their insecurities, they pop. And that's when their rage pops, and their defenses don't always protect them. So when you start cutting off the best parts and pieces of yourself, when you stop communicating, you walk on eggshells, what are you doing? You are, in essence, babysitting their shame. You're being so careful with it. You're trying not to activate their shame. You end up living your life avoiding ever activating that shame. Now, this happens most pointedly in intimate relationships, when you are just trying to keep the trains in your relationship running on time. If this is early on and you don't fully understand cognitive dissonance, then you're going to justify and get yourself stuck. You don't recognize that what you're doing in this relationship by being so careful is babysitting their shame and their fragility. And you're running around in exhausting circles to ensure that you, and nor does anybody else, nobody says anything to activate their shame and to set them off. You spend holidays, dinner time, nights out, days at home, as shame-free as possible so you can maintain the illusion of the relationship and steer clear of their rage. In familial relationships, as a child, you may have done this without even knowing you were doing this. You may have been very careful at the dinner table, careful not to look up the wrong way, not to clink your fork or say the wrong thing. You obsessively ensured when you were growing up that your toys were kept out of the way. You may have lived in fear that someone would say the wrong thing in the household and set the narcissistic parent off. You may have spent a childhood crawling, walking, sitting, and sleeping on eggshells. I am convinced that children with narcissistic parents never quite exhale or even relax during their entire childhoods. They sit perched, waiting for the next blow up. And it's quite heartbreaking when you think about how little control a child has. So they do the best that they can, but there are so many factors out of the child's control, such as the narcissistic parent's work world, their other adult relationships, money. And all of this becomes the origin of the anxiety that narcissistic abuse survivors have. And even some patterns that look almost obsessive and compulsive in children, that perfectionism kids have when they have narcissistic parents. It's actually infuriating. The children in these damned situations, they're babysitting their parents' shame. When that parent should have been an adult and been parenting their child, all of that fell on the child. But that's the tragedy of the narcissistic parent, isn't it? It robs a person of a fully safe and happy childhood. In the workplace, it is everyone trying to handle the difficult boss, right? Making sure that they have their coffee just so on their desk and making sure they avoid giving them the bad news in a certain order and keep catering to their controlling and specific demands. They stare saucer-eyed at each other in meetings, trying to ensure the tyrannical boss doesn't get set off. Once again, what are those folks doing in the workplace? They're babysitting their boss's shame. When you see it as babysitting the narcissist's shame, the dynamic actually can make a little more sense. You're trying to keep it at bay, almost protect it. One could argue that all of us are guilty of enabling the narcissist by trying to tread oh so carefully around their fragile egos, their chronic sense of inadequacy, and their omnipresent shame. But it's not that simple. Most of us don't have the bandwidth, the time, the interest, or even the safety to live in the wake of the narcissist's rage. And we don't always have the freedom, safety, or even the confidence in ourselves to step away from these relationships. And sometimes it's pity, guilt, and misplaced loyalty that keeps us stuck in these situations. The narcissistic relationship is a chess game that cannot be won. But by understanding the dynamics, you may give yourself permission to disengage, stop blaming yourself, and start cultivating healthier spaces outside of those emotionally and psychologically limited and stunted relationships. Here's a question. What do you think narcissistic people do once they lose control of you? Drop your answers in the comments. I think some of you already know the answer to this because you're living it. The primary dynamics that drive a narcissistic person in a relationship are power, control, and domination. And the narcissistic person uses the relationship as a source of validation. If those needs are not being met or cannot be achieved, that is a contributor to the volatility of these relationships. So, if you are in a relationship with a narcissistic person and do get more power or control, or exert your autonomy, the narcissistic person is going to react badly. So here's some examples of this. One could be that you're the adult child of a narcissistic parent and you no longer need them for money or housing, or you make your own way in the world and they were using money to control you. You are in a narcissistic relationship and you get a promotion or a new job that may put you in a more powerful or well-paid position. Or you leave an abusive, tyrannical, narcissistic boss to take another job or start your own venture where they cannot control you in the day-to-day anymore. The responses to this can vary. In some cases, you will see the narcissistic person try to keep you small, tell you that you're probably going to fail, or that you're kidding yourself if you think you will be able to pull this new thing off, or that this success of yours is temporary or fleeting, or that you better be careful what you wish for because it may all be a big disappointment and won't you feel foolish when it all falls apart. In some cases, you will see that vulnerable victimization we so often see in narcissism. Oh, woe is me, will say the narcissist. Everything goes your way. I guess you won't need me anymore. I guess my life has just been so unlucky. Things come really easily to you. I always have to work hard for everything I get. That kind of thing. In other cases, you may experience abandonment. They may want to leave, say they want to leave the relationship and cut you off, or give you the silent treatment, or even imply that maybe this relationship won't work because you will be so busy in your new job. Or they may go full on revenge on you. This may be, for example, a smear campaign by that tyrannical boss who tries to badmouth you, and badmouth your new endeavor, or talking with other people about you and saying bad things, or holding back on a piece of information that you may need. They will actively try to sabotage you. Remember what healing is about in these relationships. Finally crawling out of the subjugated space that you had to remain in to keep this relationship going. Silencing yourself, making yourself smaller, pretty much clipping your own wings, not individuating or developing your own autonomy of any kind. But healing also means, as you individuate, that you will incur the wrath, displeasure, or frank abandonment by the narcissist. Your growth is not something that the narcissistic person can tolerate, especially because it means they're going to lose their power and their control. So when you slowly slip out of their control, you become an object of contempt. You stop being supply. You're a headache. And they want to put you back in your subjugated place. They want you in the service of their ego, not growing as an individual yourself. Narcissistic people do not like relationships that they cannot control, which is often why they are so focused on getting into leadership positions. By being in charge, they can control. And that could be everything from being the shift manager at a fast food restaurant to the CEO of a corporation. It's all about control. Might be small scale, might be big scale, but it's control. When a narcissistic person senses that they are losing control of you, you can expect this entire litany of reactions. And they may shapeshift and shift strategies too. Some vindictiveness, then victimhood, then abandonment. It can be a painful realization and a difficult part of healing that your growth, your advancement, your aspiration, you simply becoming you, was never going to be allowed in this relationship. You may have suspected it, but when it really happens, you see it. Many people who are very trauma bonded in these relationships know that the implicit message is that if you grow, they will leave. And the fears that go along with it means that many people in narcissistic relationships have shrunk themselves for years to make it work. Because no, they will be pissed off, and then they will continue to berate you or abandon you if you dare ever get out of their controlling grip. There's no room for two people's realities in a narcissistic relationship. Always keep that in mind. These relationships work as long as they can dominate and control you. And once you challenge that dynamic, it cannot work. So the short answer to that is they will blow up or they will leave. But that idea of either facing the rage or facing the abandonment is so overwhelming for so many people in a narcissistic relationship that even though it's not intentional, that you may find yourself holding yourself back and not expanding yourself to all the full potential that you have because of that fear and because the narcissistic person will not lose control of you, and you might feel too scared of what will happen if you did. My only hope for you someday is that you do. Sometimes, as you learn about fawning and you do the work of the trauma work and you connect to yourself somatically, you may actually find that you're not fawning as much. But when you stop fawning, you might find that you're being called difficult. So let's take that on. So developing healthy assertiveness is very difficult for survivors of narcissistic abuse. You may have even had it before the relationship, that healthy assertiveness, but then years of having any needs shamed, any asks being viewed as excessive, well, that's bad enough. If you were raised with a narcissistic parent, you may have also developed a fawn response in the face of the subjugations and the invalidations that were happening in your relationship with your parent. The fawn response is observed, manifested, but observed, when a person behaves in a manner in which it's almost as though you are trying to win the narcissistic person over, be what they want you to be, sort of appease them, soothe them. The fawn response is a trauma and a safety response. It's designed to maintain a connection with the narcissistic or harmful caregiver or parent or adult. Fawning is not a conscious process. So when people characterize fawning as being seductive or manipulative, that is patently untrue. It is a sympathetic nervous system level response. It is meant to make us safe. However, many people will sometimes experience shame because they have a fawn response with narcissistic parents and with other people throughout their lives. It's as though people who are having this fawn response feel somehow complicit in the narcissistic person's behavior. And I say this as someone who has a lot of a fawn response in me. And interestingly, as I promote the book, I will sometimes be met, even in an online event, certainly in person, when people are asking me lots of questions. But I sometimes feel compelled to give in when a group of people is around me and asking questions and answer the questions of the person first who feels the most threatening to me. I don't know what makes them threatened. Maybe they're entitled. Maybe it's something about the expression on their face. But after it happens, I'm incensed at myself afterwards because that is precisely the person I did not want to yield to, or maybe not even get to their question. I can even feel the physiological sensation that compels that fawn in me. And then by engaging in that fawn response, it's sort of me again, behaving in line with that sympathetic nervous system call. The fawn response can be another driver in that whole agreeableness paradox I recently talked about in another video. Fawners by nature can seem accommodating, yielding, and that they will, in a way it seems like they're trying to be engaging and be the best possible supply. Now, breaking out of the fawn response is no small task, and stay tuned to that because my colleague and dear friend, Dr. Ingrid Clayton, has a book coming out about precisely this issue, which is going to be quite amazing. But to break out of the fawn response is literally an act of sympathetic nervous system defiance. It's about taking an uncomfortable path, in essence, not fawning. And here's the problem, though. You do the work, you get the therapy, but when you slowly stop fawning, especially when the people around you are accustomed to it, and even if they're not narcissistic, and then you switch it up and actually make appropriate asks. You make your needs known. You ask people to do a job that they were supposed to do, or make a deadline, or answer a question you asked. Just getting out of the fawn, narcissistic recovery, I can't make a need known headspace is big enough to actually make the ask. But something that I am seeing happen to people is that when they make the ask, they're being branded as difficult, right? And this is one of the most painful and setbacky things that can happen to a survivor, especially to somebody who's traditionally been a fawner. And I have to say that as I went through the process of 6 months of assiduously promoting a book that improbably ended up getting recognized, that in a strange way only happened because I had to do the work and actually do the work of keeping that fawn response in check. And I found myself at times having to be demanding. I would feel sick to my stomach when I made these asks of people in terms of promoting the book, and would afterwards ruminate and ask myself, was I wrong? Should I not have done that? Maybe I wasn't nice enough, and on and on and on. But the hardest part wasn't just the asking. It was when I was treated as though I was being unreasonable and difficult. I felt exhausted all the time for those months because just making the ask was hard enough. But to then be called or treated as though I was difficult was very tough. And then, like any good self-doubter, I would take those emails and text to other people and say, am I wrong with what I asked? Did I do something wrong? And bless many of these patient people around me, they would say, not at all. You should have asked for more. So the fawner's fear, in many ways, is to be called or be characterized as difficult. Because to be called or characterized as difficult, it carries with it a massive opportunity cost. And that opportunity cost is to lose attachments and connections and relationships and love. It's really to be abandoned, and those are very high stakes. So that's when we enter catch-22 territory. Fawners feel shame for fawning, and they wish they would have stood up for themselves, or at the very least, not fawned. So then there's no winning. If you stand up for yourself, you're labeled difficult. If you fawn, you feel shame. So those of us who are indoctrinated and learn to fawn and accommodate and never be a bother, we don't just, through our responses, make a narcissistic person's life easier. We make everyone's life easier. The fawner's easy breezy, I don't want to be a bother approach to life makes life very easy for the folks around us. And in a way, we are kept in place by the fears of what would happen if we were to make our needs known. Because invariably, if you do make your needs known, someone's going to think you're being demanding or difficult for asking very basic things, like expecting someone to do their job, or show up on time, or pay what they promised, or respond to your question. It's not as though most of you are making any kind of rock star demands. Your asks are often quite simple, but these simple asks and the asks that come up when you are being assertive, which is often required to achieve at most jobs or careers, can seem insurmountable when you have experienced a history of narcissistic abuse. And we can often hold back on doing it when we get the pushback and the characterization of our asks, particularly if we're making an insistent or an assertive ask, as us being demanding or difficult. This sort of accommodation, the providing narcissistic supply, the going along, the being the good girl, the good guy, the good person, it's a very difficult legacy of narcissistic abuse. And people looking in at you from the outside may not peg it as such. They may praise you for being flexible and accommodating. But all of your flexibility and accommodation are often not reciprocated. And other people will have no problem doing what you ask in the name of holding their boundary, but are so used to your flexibility that they hold you to a different standard. The thought of being thought of as difficult or being branded as difficult can be very destabilizing for survivors of narcissistic abuse. Not the least of why is because it can feel gaslighty. It can raise more self-blame, more self-doubt, and even leave us wondering if we are the narcissistic ones. It can throw people backwards from their tentative attempts to advocate for themselves or to assert themselves. But we already know how the story turns out if we just sit quiet and don't do anything. If we keep ourselves silent and keep orienting to being what they want. So as my friend Ingrid said to me, when I told her that I was having the repeated experience of being told I was difficult for making some asks around book promotion and other asks I was making professionally, she said to me basically, own it. Now, I'm not sure I'll ever be able to do that, and being seen as difficult is always going to be difficult for me. But for any of you who have had that experience of being fawners and pleasers and appeasers and accommodators, who finally stretch, who ask for what you need, who reach for a dream and get shut down as difficult, remember this. Maybe this is how narcissistic people get shit done. And maybe it's time we take a page out of their playbook. But the real truth is that it is easier for folks to shut you down and characterize you as demanding, rather than to do the things that you ask of them. So let me put a question to you. You know how a lot of the time we spend in a narcissistic relationship is seeking out their approval? On the day you stop seeking out their approval, what's left of the relationship? For a whole variety, for a whole lot of trauma-bonded, trauma response, like fawning, and attachment reasons, a dynamic that characterizes lots of narcissistic relationships is us seeking their approval, right? That's a classical dynamic in these relationships. The analogy I can give is that trying to attach to or connect with a narcissistic person is like trying to hold on to a slimy rock in the middle of a stormy ocean. You're holding on for dear life, but you keep slipping off. And you hope you can somehow figure out a way to hold on to it before one more wave slips you off. This approval-seeking dynamic, while it's often most pronounced, for example, of children, for children of narcissistic or antagonistic or emotionally abusive parents, is also something we see, frankly, in all narcissistic relationships. Because narcissistic people do care so much about status and appearances, we learn when we are in these relationships that we are not seen or loved for who we are, but for what we bring to the relationship, what we bring to the narcissistic person. So if we succeed or do good or make money or win a prize or somehow bring good attention or light to the family or relationship, then they may actually pay attention to us or to attune to us. So what does this look like? If you were the achievement-striving, perfectionist kid who desperately tried to be the perfect student or athlete or musician or winner so that your narcissistic parent would approve of you or notice you or be proud of you, then you get this. If you were the partner who cooked gourmet meals or decorated the house perfectly or always looks good or buys beautiful, thoughtful, extravagant gifts or entertains beautifully or plans perfect date nights or vacations or goes out of your way to win over the people who are close to the narcissist, like their family or their friends or even people they work with, just so the narcissistic partner will approve of you or think that you are indispensable, then you also get this. If you are the friend who is always trying to be that great, cool friend who tries to get the hard-to-get concert tickets or who suggests a fun night out and figures out all the plans, or talks about the fascinating thing that's happening at your cool job, or the new opportunity you have to prove that you are worth knowing and to get that narcissistic friend's approval. Or you try to win that friend over by sharing a story about a famous or renowned person you met or you worked with or you know, just so they'll be more interested in you. Then you also get this. If you are the employee who goes way above and beyond, who actually tries to literally read the boss's mind, you over-research the topic, you overdo the job, or even feel like you need to share more about your accomplishments or other nifty things you are doing or experiences that you are having, just to get that boss or manager to notice you, to give you that credit and to approve of you, you get this. It's not just doing the good thing to do the great thing, it's to get them to approve of you. The narcissistic relationship is like an old house that always needs work to get done. You don't ever really get a weekend off when you live in that kind of a place. It's the shutters, it's the leaky sink, it's the roof, it's the broken step, it's the big electrical project, on and on and on. But with a narcissistic relationship, you also never get a weekend off because you're forever doing these things in this quest for approval. And this is because of the faulty belief that if we could just wow the narcissistic person and be awesome and great and make them look good and just be really cool, then we would get their approval. And if we get their approval, then we are safe. Now, safe means different things. For a child, it is attachment and perhaps the felt sense that if you are approved of or approvable, then you won't be abandoned. Safe may mean a sense of belonging. And again, in adulthood, it's the same thing. If you're approved of, then you won't be abandoned. And abandonment is a core wound for so many people. If you can get approval, then we are seen and validated. And too many of us conflate approval and love. If we are approved, we are safe because the boss will love us and we keep the job. If we're approved of, we don't end up alone. We don't end up ostracized. In narcissistic relationships, we are perpetually a 6-year-old child who runs home with the perfect score and the gold star on our homework in hopes of the parent noticing us and getting their approval. And that dynamic sustains throughout our lives. We are forever holding up that paper with the gold star, looking at parents, partners, friends, bosses, even adult children, like approval-seeking children. Look, look, didn't I do good? Huh? Look. There's also the challenge that you may show up with your achievement, your proverbial gold star, as it were, to get their approval. But sometimes you got to be careful because you may trigger their competitiveness or insecurity. So your approval seeking, which feels so necessary in the relationship, may even backfire and result in them getting angry with you. So we're right back where we always are with these situations. You can't win. And keep in mind, by approval, I mean that they approve of you, like they think you're good, that you did something cool, that you did something great. They pay attention to you. I don't mean the approval of like you need them to agree to do something that you aren't going to do, like get the car fixed or pay a bill. Does that make sense? That's not what I'm talking about. That second kind of approval requirement, like you need their permission to take the car to the mechanic, that's control. That's different than what I'm talking about here. Lots of survivors find themselves in a haze of exhaustion because of overachievement, and not for the sake of the achievement itself, but because you're pedaling faster and faster and faster to get their approval. You're trying to hold on to the slimy, slippery rock that is the narcissistic person in your life. Personally, I'm going to put myself out there. I'm going to look at my sad history, and I'm struck by how much my perfect little student persona of childhood was actually embedded in a fantasy of wanting to get the certificate or the gold star or the prize so I could get the narcissistic parent to notice and maybe be proud of me. Ironically, because the stakes were so high, it wasn't about getting the A, it was about getting notice. Getting the blue ribbon or the A+ would mean literal survival. That anxiety of trying to succeed would overwhelm me, and invariably I would blow it. And I lived in these ruminative fantasies about what it would be like to be that other kid who got the tennis trophy or the academic award or the piano playing medal, fantasizing that if I was as good as them, then I would be the most lovable kid in the world, and I would be loved because I would get that approval. And in my case, that dynamic would trail me well into adulthood, where I would often try to impress partners especially, but also family or friends, by trying to do great. Getting the academic award in graduate school, or the doctorate, or the bestseller. I was still the little kid, fantasizing about the trophy, not because of the trophy, but because that would mean approval and love, and I would be safe. Now I was the adult, constructing my relationships the same way. One day, I stopped doing that after doing the gruesome work of grief and healing and all the rest of it. I have a handful of people in my life who seem to like me, regardless of my credential or success. I keep them close. And every day it's a battle to not think I have to win people over through achievement. Now, all of this leads to an interesting paradox, which is, what happens to the narcissistic relationship when you really see it clearly and you're no longer seeking their approval because you're not engaging in it the same way? Well, the relationship sort of deflates like a balloon with a leak, because your approval seeking was the major fuel powering the engine. The day you stop seeking their approval by doing, there really is no more there. You may still excel, because that excelling in perfectionism is a very hard habit to break, but it may just be who you are, or that you keep pushing and pushing because you're genuinely interested in whatever it is you're doing well at, but you no longer trot these wins in front of the narcissistic person. In fact, if you're doing well, you don't even tell them about them. Remember the whole don't share the good news or the bad news with the narcissistic person. That's a big part of the radical acceptance, especially when you can't leave the relationship. When you no longer seek their approval, then there is nothing, really. The relationship is what it is, an empty, anemic, hollow, superficial, one-sided, uncollaborative, unattuned relationship where they only notice you when they need something. And you recognize, once and for all, that in fact, there is no there. This may be followed by grief, radical acceptance, and radical acceptance-driven awareness that you have your reasons for perhaps even remaining in the relationship, but they are no longer about hope or chasing the impossible, but instead may be about things like you have minor children together, finances, culture, or a long game you may have to play for other practical reasons. Once you stop seeking the narcissistic person's approval, you start to see that the relationship was a bit of an illusion. And the illusion was kept alive by your hard work, you're rushing home with the gold star. Once you get it, and I really mean get it, you step back. And when you are no longer that hard-working source of supply or status for them, they may lean on you for whatever need you fulfill for them, whatever it is. But you have the opportunity yourself now that you're no longer fighting for their approval to instead lean into a more authentic and true reflection on why you do what you do. Why do you work so hard? Why do you do the things you do? Some of those ancient threads of wanting their approval may linger for us for a long time. But once we can separate that out, we may be less concerned with winning and more concerned with the process, the meaning, the purpose of what we are doing. You don't try to keep the house perfectly clean anymore and say, fuck it, I'm going to go take a long walk today. You don't stay up until 2 a.m. to get more work done. You go to bed and say, it's good enough, and there's no point in staying up half the night with this. When you stop trying to get their approval, it's a massive step to getting your life back. Yes, they will get in their digs for a minute, wondering why things aren't the way they once were, perhaps criticizing you or the work or the house because it isn't what it once was. But you can just shrug now. You aren't 6. You don't have to put all the effort into holding on to the slimy, slippery, unattachable rock, because there are other safer and detachable spaces out there that don't care if you got straight A's, or the meal was perfect, or you're a size 4, or you have the right job title, or you know the right people. We have such distorted, messed up ideas of what a relationship is as a result of being in these narcissistic relationships. So much so that we have to relearn that approval or just mere acknowledgement isn't love. Approval seeking is playing to their need for status and supply. In contrast, love, real love, is safe. And these relationships are not. Thanks again.